with teenagers or children, young girls that you might know. It comes up quite a bit, where a girl will be referred to as promiscuous, or an adult woman will feel like she can't really get the kind of relationship she wants with men. But I wanted to kind of use a different word to sort of get at more what's driving that, what's kind of underneath it for the woman. And in my experience, it's usually more of a search for emotional intimacy, more closeness, and this kind of hope that sex will eventually lead to a more meaningful relationship. So sextimacy is a combination of the words sex and intimacy. And when I say sex, really this could be a range of things. It can be the term that's so popular now, hooking up, which can refer to anything from kissing, making out, oral sex, to intercourse. So it's all pretty vague, particularly with young teens in terms of what's actually happening. And sextimacy occurs on a continuum. In some cases, it's almost part of normative teen development and young adult development that a person might have a hookup experience. In other cases, this can become a way of life where maybe in the young teen years and then throughout young adulthood, a young woman really, this is the only way, the only avenue that she knows to forge relationships and connections with men. Sometimes we think, okay, this is just a teenage thing or it's just a young adult thing, but that's not always the case. Oftentimes, it's sextimacy, as I said, can go on to where even a woman in her 40s might feel like she's never really been able to achieve the kind of relationship she wants. I've certainly seen many examples with teenagers and young adults, but there's also cases, and certainly cases that I've seen, where when a woman's sexual coming of age has been in a sextimacy context, so where she first started her sexual relationships through hooking up with people that she didn't know very well. Maybe eventually she gets married, suddenly she finds herself kind of in an extramarital affair and very surprised and confused by this. That can happen when sextimacy is just sort of a way, a mode, almost like a coping skill to deal with distress or deal with low self-esteem, that it can crop up again later on in life. Anybody have any examples of this or thoughts about it from your work? Yeah, you're nodding. Okay, so this is familiar territory. So sextimacy is cyclical. What I notice in my work with women is it sort of starts with a depleted sense of self. Not just kind of, in and out, low feelings about yourself. I mean, most people deal with that from time to time in their life, but more like a chronically depleted self. We'll come back to the slide, but women who chronically struggle with things like body image, eating disorders, or even if it's not a clinical eating disorder, but very obsessive about food, diet, body, depression, very hard, self-critical on themselves. And of course, there's all kinds of reasons for the depleted self, which we'll get into. Some of it has to do with early attachment experiences with caregivers. Oftentimes, it's really at no fault necessarily of parents. The culture and social messages alone can often put a teen at risk for a sort of sextimacy dynamic to dominate her life. Going back to the cycle. When a person has a depleted sense of self, one thing that can help or kind of ease some of the suffering is to engage in kind of active fantasy. And what I notice with women who are caught in this cycle, they're thinking a lot about their hookup partners, whether they're thinking or hoping that they'll see them again, maybe obsessively checking text messages, wanting to pop in and see them, hoping there'll be some way that they'll see each other, just kind of imagining and picturing it, maybe a crush that they have, hoping they'll see them at a party. So there's a lot of that going on, or in between hookup behavior, thinking a lot about the person, so that the next time they see them, it's almost automatic that a sexual event will occur again. I think the fantasy for a lot of these women is just a way to feel something. If they're feeling so yucky, to begin this kind of fantasy gives them hope for feeling exhilarated, feeling wanted, feeling desired. The next part of the cycle is the conquest. So this is the actual sexual event itself. So as I said, if somebody's actively fantasizing and then they actually run into this particular person, it's almost automatic. The horse is out of the barn, the script has been written, they're going to engage in some kind of sexual experience. And we can look at an example if that would be helpful. But for some women, the sexual act itself is very enjoyable. There can be, of course, an adrenaline release. And in that moment, that feeling depleted, the woman might feel very powerful and even euphoric. On the other hand, for many women, many of the women I see, young women in particular, oftentimes the sexual act itself isn't enjoyable. They're having a very disconnected experience, where they're not very connected in their body to the sex act itself. These women report more that they're feeling excited by the fact that the man's showing the desire, the attention. But when it comes to the sex, I'll ask often, well, did you enjoy it, or how did that part go? I don't know, it just sort of happened. There's not a lot of detail. That's often what I hear, and I've heard it repeatedly, especially with younger women, that the sex act just happened, almost as if they're a little bit surprised themselves. In terms of really enjoying it, if this kind of pattern of disconnected sexual experience occurs in young teen years, it can sort of set up a pattern over time, even in young adulthood, of not being able to really enjoy her sexual experiences, where she's almost out of her body when the sex act itself is happening. So that's a very problematic component. When the conquest is over, there's the aftermath. Unfortunately, the aftermath usually is a bit awkward. There's a quick exit, and generally, whatever kinds of feelings of euphoria or feeling desired, those are usually pretty short-lived, and the woman is often left feeling even worse about herself. That depleted self comes roaring back in many cases, it's often even stronger than it was initially. And that has to do with, women in sex intimacy, and what I talk about and write about, they're usually always willing participants in the sex act. It isn't so much that, but because there's a fantasy and a desire, a hope for more, that maybe something special will come from this. When that doesn't happen, she's left kind of feeling disappointed, possibly used, and often the women and girls I talk to begin to harshly self-criticize themselves for having done the event. So then going back to the cycle, that aftermath just kind of feeds into the depleted self, making the depleted self more vulnerable to active fantasy and to, again, another instance of sex intimacy. And I'm really oftentimes alarmed at how much this can occur. Even this week I talked with a young teen that I've seen for probably about a year, and she had her first sexual experience about, I guess, within the past couple of weeks. And again, it was a sort of just happened scenario. And then within another week, another sex intimacy event occurred. Again, it just kind of happened scenario. So something seems to happen when the first event occurs, particularly if it's a girl or a young woman's first experience with sex, that it's like they themselves are a little bit confused by it. It's kind of fragmenting, and it's sort of this overwhelming feeling, and maybe they begin to kind of operate in this way, not even realizing themselves